What Really Happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show. It's Thursday, June 23rd, 2016. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. We have oodles to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. A couple of quick program notes. Obviously, third hour tomorrow, the Lady Claire will be joining us again. Next Wednesday, Patrick Knowlton, a witness in the Vince Foster case, will be joining us in our third hour to talk about what he saw and, more to the point, what happened to him as a result of his going public with what he had known. All right, today is the Brexit vote day. The polls are going to be open for about another hour. Then they're going to do what they're going to do and announce the predetermined result tomorrow morning and claim it's a victory for democracy. It's anything but. And regardless of how it comes out, this has sparked calls for EU referendums all across the European Union. And Marine Le Pen is out there saying France is considering leaving with the referendum. What they're going to have to do is guarantee the honesty of the elections, because we're already hearing this one's rigged, and we knew it was going to be rigged. We knew it was going to be rigged. But there's an important point everybody needs to remember. Every member of the European Union is also a member of the United Nations and bound by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which recognizes the right of any people to sever from their current government and determine their own political system, like Crimea did not too long ago. Unfortunately, the people behind the New World Order and Brussels don't care about laws and rules. They want what they want and think it's a natural law. Now, apparently, the Belgian Prime Minister is saying they need to have a meeting because of growing doubts in all of the European member states about the European Union project, because it has turned out to be a bad deal for every member nation. It's a great deal for the EU commissioners, great deal for the European Central Bank, not very good for ordinary people. Of course, anytime somebody sets up a new layer of government above everything, it's not for the benefit of the people. It's for the benefit of that new layer of government. Now, the Remain campaign was out there with all these claims they were making that fell apart, already fell apart. Remember how they were saying Turkey was not going to join the EU? Well, it turns out there are talks starting with Turkey within days. The Germans are saying, no, Britain leaving the EU will not spark a trade war. And the head of the EU came on out and said, no, there will be no reform whatsoever on the open borders. And claims that jobless EU migrants will be deported is a myth. These were 4 key claims made by the Remain camp, and they were demolished by no less a figure than the head of the EU himself. And David Cameron was campaigning on all these issues. Oh, if we stay in the EU and work from within to reform it. You can't reform a system whose leaders are not elected. Mikhail Gorbachev is right. The European Union is the old Soviet model in Western clothing. Now, Donald Trump, of course, backed the Brexit. So did a lot of people, urging Europeans to reconsider their membership and their loss of sovereignty. Because of the migrant crisis, they've lost the open borders, Schengen, and it turns out that the EU trading bloc is more restrictive than empowering in terms of global trade. Everything's controlled by the European Union. They tell the member nations who they'll trade with and what they're allowed to trade. Now, over at Natural News, they hold a view similar to mine. The globalists are going to steal the referendum with massive fraud. Remain is going to be declared the winner no matter what the actual vote count is. And that's absolutely going to be true. Because the EU has spent decades and invested trillions enslaving the member nations of the European Union to their corporate fascist dictatorship. Do you really think they're going to let a little thing like voters get in their way? Of course not. These are people who think they are above the rules and the law, and whatever gets them what they want is good, and anything that gets in the way is bad. Now, last night, after we finished our radio show, there was a telltale that this election is going to be Scotlanded. And that is, they canceled the exit polls. Now remember, exit polls exist as a safety check on the voting process itself. If the exit polls are too far out of line with the official results, it signals election fraud. Unless it happens here in the United States, and then the media will tell you, well, the voters were lying to the exit pollsters, which is nonsense. How many of you have actually known an exit pollster? Why would you care what they think about you? But when Hillary had her sudden come-from-behind victory in New Hampshire back in 2008, and the exit polls said Obama should have won, that was what the corporate media told you. Oh, the voters were lying to the exit polls. That's it. Well, this time they didn't even bother with that. They just canceled the exit polls. The votes are all going to go into the counting center, this black box, and then the next day they're going to come out and say, absolutely, you chose to remain the slaves of the European Central Bank and to let these unelected EU commissioners run every aspect of your life. And if you believe that, I have some of Saddam's nuclear weapons to sell you. And there are a lot of people who are very concerned because they're showing up at the polling places and they're being given these pencils, not pens. And the concern was, well, a ballot marked with a pencil can be erased and redrawn. Why can't we use pens? And according to a reader who actually voted, the people at the polls are literally saying, well, they're concerned that the ballots might get wet in this torrential rain, so better to use a pen a pencil rather than a pen. So this reader went on home, took a piece of paper, marked it with a ballpoint pen, ran it under the faucet. The ink stayed. It's complete nonsense. Okay, take a moment here to say hello to our returning on-air affiliates. We're talking about the Brexit vote taking place right now. The polls are going to close in a little over 50 minutes from now. And the indications are that, yes, indeed, the Eurocrats are basically going to rig this thing to keep the British people their slaves. Polls in Britain are showing half of the Brexit backers are convinced there's going to be fraud in this election. And again, from this reader who was in Europe and voted, confirming there were no exit polls whatsoever. There is absolutely no check on the accuracy of the official result, and that tells you it's just going to be a complete fabrication and a lie, like they did to Scotland, like we've seen here in the U.S. in the primaries. And the whole world is getting it rubbed in their face that any pretensions of democracy are an illusion to keep the slaves obedient and happy. We're going to take a phone call here. Obi in Colorado. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, you kind of took my thunder away from me. I was going to mention the fact that they're not doing exit polls. And, to me, that's clear rigging, not to mention they're not even going to release the results until tomorrow.
Yeah, they're going to release them very early when people are on their way to work and hope that it's not going to trigger rioting in the streets. But, yeah, the instant they cancel the exit polls, that's it. The only exit polls are being run by YouGov, which is very firmly in the Remain camp. And YouGov was running exit polls up in Scotland, and they were very much in the Keep Scotland in Great Britain camp. So, I mean, it's a complete charade. And here's something. Go ahead.
I want to mention one more point. They had a shooting in Germany today, and I think that was actually a diversion because I've kind of looked around at the mainstream media today, and they're not covering the Brexit issue at all.
Well, I've seen it mentioned, but they're not going to talk about it until tomorrow when they announce that the Remain camp has won.
Right, and there were stories on Fox and MSNBC today about how wonderful it was to have the European Union because you could get a job anywhere in the European Union as long as it existed.
Yeah, but they don't have a lot of jobs anywhere in the European Union, and those jobs are being competed for by this flood of migrants. It's complete, total nonsense. I'm looking at this headline on Fox News, UK voters getting final say over whether to stay in the European Union. That's a flat-out lie, because even if by some miracle Leave were to win the election, It's an advisory referendum only. And I've seen a bunch of articles reminding everybody about that even if Leave were to have a landslide victory, Parliament can just ignore it.
Well, there was also another story, and I forget the news agency that released it, that young people wanted to stay in the European Union when just the opposite is the truth.
Well,
and, that's a way of spinning things.
Well, it would actually make a little bit of sense that the younger people would want to remain in the EU because they've never known any life other than being part of the European Union. The older people who can remember how much better things were before the EU, they're the ones voting for the exit.
Well, the main point is everything is being rigged.
Oh, no question.
I hope it makes for uprisings in Britain, just like it's going on in France, because people are tired of this totalitarian government they have that wasn't elected.
Yeah, I mean, and that really is what it comes down to. The European Commission is an unelected dictatorship. Their word is law. Okay, the European Parliament is a theater to make it look like there's some semblance of democracy, but it isn't. It's an absolute iron-fisted dictatorship, just like the former Soviet Union. And this is coming from Mikhail Gorbachev, who would obviously be in a position to recognize iron-fisted dictatorships.
I agree, Michael, and that's all I have for you, so I'll let you go.
All right, well, thank you very much here. Now, there has been a last-minute wrinkle because the so-called Remain bounce was centered around London, people who are tied in with the financial systems that could be harmed by the exit. But they have been hit with record-setting rain. They're even calling it biblical rain and flooding, disrupting the votes. Polling places are being closed. And up north, where the weather is calm, is where you find the strongest vote to leave. But we've already had somebody from the British government coming on out and saying, oh, the weather won't be a factor. It's never been a factor before. We don't expect the flooding and storms to change the final outcome. And I'm sure he's absolutely correct about that, but not quite in the way he is trying to imply. People are already making jokes that very obviously the deity is on the side of the exit because of all this flooding hitting the stronghold of the Remain vote. So here's another article, what I was saying, King World News, basically out there saying that even if Brexit were to win the vote, it doesn't mean anything is going to happen. They keep pushing that over and over again. And I'm sure that would make a lot of people very angry with Parliament, where obviously the easiest thing to do is to steal the election and claim that continued slavery is what the English people voted for, to save Parliament from being tarred in feathers. And Jean-Claude Juncker is definitely letting his position go to his head. He came on out earlier today and publicly said the vote should be ignored anyway. You know, votes can be ignored if they don't agree with Juncker in the EU. And so even if the Leave were to win and Parliament were to say we're leaving, and by the way, there is a provision in the EU Charter, Article 50, that gives member nations the right to leave, Juncker is already saying, no, we're not going to let you go. You don't get to leave me, you my bitch. So let's take some phone calls here. Tom in Florida, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Good afternoon, Michael. First off, I'd like to say what's going to happen in Great Britain or you could call it England or whatever. You got George Soros. He's probably financing most of this. I do want to say this. I don't know how the white Anglo Northern English would vote for to stay in the EU when they're being flooded with illegals and immigration. And let me ask you a question. 9 out of 10 babies born in London, I heard, are called Mohammed. So how are you going to actually want the total destruction of your country by a group that doesn't actually want to assimilate over there? They're still going to keep their culture over there, the Muslims. And I don't get the white English would actually sell themselves out so bad. But you know what? They've done it here, too. And you got the Zionists basically run in England, United States now, and every other. And they're the minorities, but they have the majority of the news media. And, you know, that's just the way it is. They have the money. Look at Soros financing this. Same thing with Hillary. George Soros is behind Hillary Clinton, Rodham Clinton. Or I would like to call her Hillary Rodham Blythe, because the real name of Clinton is Blythe. And by the way, Michael, did you know who Billy Blythe's real dad was?
No.
His name was William Blythe. His uncle was in Ku Klux Klan, and now I don't know if you don't believe me, you check it out. His name was William Blythe. He changed his name to Clinton, I believe, when he turned 12 or 13 years old. I'm not remember. I can't remember.
Bill Clinton's middle name is Blythe.
What's that?
Bill Clinton's middle name is Blythe. Oh, I'm sorry. No, it's William Jefferson.
His middle name is Jefferson.
Yes.
William Jefferson Clinton.
Yeah, but I know Blythe is in there somewhere.
Birthing name.
Anyway, listen, let's get on back to the Brexit, because I'm looking at pollstation.uk, which is running an online poll, which has Leave at 81%. And so there's obviously something very funny going on here, and we know it, and if I were in Great Britain and I had some investment capital, I would be going long on tar and feathers and ropes and rails and the rest of it. Tom, thank you for the phone call. We're going to switch over to Betty in North Carolina. Okay, we're going to switch over to Betty in North Carolina. Betty, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, you just kind of lifted my spirits about a week or 10 days ago when you were saying that if the vote is rigged and if they can't get out of the EU, that they would kick all the people out of Parliament. And I was just overjoyed to hear you say such a thing, but I'd love to hear what you think would take to have such a thing happen.
Well, again, I think the British voters are realizing that their elections are rigged, so they're not going to be able to vote Parliament out. I'm sure every member of Parliament has already been assured that supporting Remain, they will hang on to their jobs in Parliament because they'll just use the same machinery that stole Scotland and stole Brexit to keep, the cooperative, obedient politicians in place. But again, looking at what's going on in France, and it's still going on even though the corporate media isn't reporting it, plus there was apparently some kind of a major civil disturbance in London, which has been blacked out from the media as well. We could be at a point where we're going to start seeing rioting in all the streets of all these countries around the world. And I'm not looking forward to that, but at this point, I have to go back to what John F. Kennedy kept saying. Those who make peaceful revolution impossible make violent revolution inevitable. And he's absolutely right, and unfortunately, we may live to see it proved.
Thank you for your answer on that. One last thing.
Yes.
An electronic wire system of currency, which supposedly China and, the BRIC nations?
Yes.
Are tying into. How, I think that's the future, but I do think there's going to be something different than the fiat frauds that we've had for the last 100 years.
Yeah, it's a problem. It really is a problem. We're seeing all this chaos, and nobody's really sure what's going on because all the corporate media and the governments are lying, and it's kind of hard to wade through everything and figure out what's going on. Thank you for the phone call, Betty. And I want to mention this story that just came out of Investment Watch blog. Apparently, the counting computers being used for Brexit during their last test only counted the Remain votes. This is just now coming on out. That is, and we shouldn't be surprised. I knew they were going to do this. All the money junkies all across Europe and all across the entire world were going to lose money if Britain breaks free. And they're not going to let a little thing like voters get in the way of their wealth and empire. What do you think this is, a democracy? I mean, we let you think you live in a democracy. Isn't that good enough? But a real democracy? Oh, it would be chaos if we can't control you. We got to take a break for commercials. We're going to be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And before we get back to the news here, I want to insert a little personal note here to one of our listeners. And this would be Mr. Johnson up in Oregon. And Mr. Johnson, you sent me a letter recently, which was very kind, but you did not include a return address. and I need to get in touch with you. So just send me an email. Let's get back in touch. We need to sort things out, as it were. Now, getting back to the Brexit, markets could collapse in trading frenzy after EU referendum. Well, looking at the American stock market today, it's clear they know the fix is in. They had a great day. They're all happy. The money junkies are all happy. They're getting what they want. And who cares what you want? You're poor. What you want doesn't matter. It's only if you're rich that your opinion really carries any weight here. By the way, a lot of people are still talking about how shamelessly the Remain camp exploited the murder of Joe Cox, and they're turning into this heroic martyr and wonderful person. And we put a flashback on our website from 7 months ago where Joe Cox's husband lost his job at Save the Children, the charity, over allegations of inappropriate behavior toward women. Apparently a lot of women were complaining that he was sort of channeling the spirit of Bill Clinton or something. So, not all that good. Brexit apparently was a boon to the bookies over in Great Britain. They're estimating something like $147 million equivalent. It has been bet on the Brexit. All right, getting on back to American politics, there's been more of Hillary Clinton's emails released, and buried in there was an email confirming an earlier story that at one point Hillary Clinton's email server was wide open. They had to disable some of the security systems because they weren't working or they'd been sabotaged. And they got hit with a hacker attack that was so severe, they had to shut the server down. And Huma Abedin sent out an email to State Department employees saying, don't email Hillary Clinton anything sensitive, and I'll explain in person. So everybody knew what Hillary was doing. And that's why they're all trying to protect her, because they're protecting themselves. Now, we did post a flashback article to remind everybody that Hillary Clinton was given the lecture everybody with a security clearance gets on the proper handling of classified information, and she signed a non-disclosure agreement that laid out the criminal penalties for the mishandling of classified information. And we know absolute guilt on Title 18, Section 793, because of her email to State Department subordinate Jacob Sullivan ordering him to strip the classification headers off a document and send it to her by non-secure means. That's a felony right there, in her own words. And it doesn't matter why she did it. It doesn't matter what was in the document. It doesn't matter if Jacob Sullivan refused to do it. Her giving that instruction is a felony violation of Title 18, which under other provisions of Title 18 disqualifies her from holding government office. So, Judicial Watch has just released the State Department Inspector General investigation records. Now, this is a reference back to May, where the State Department's Office of the Inspector General issued a report criticizing Hillary Clinton and the way she was handling her communications. And that report was a summary, and Judicial Watch got a court order for the release of the original documents on which the State Department Inspector General made that very damaging report. And now everybody's poring over that, looking for exactly what it was he was talking about. Another article coming on out here from Riv.com. How much blame should Hillary Clinton bear for Libya? Well, she's head of the State Department at the time. She bears it all. She refused additional security. She botched it. It's a botch-up. Remember what Harry Truman used to say, the buck stops here? Of course, for Barack Obama, he's got a sign on his desk saying, buck? What buck? I never saw a buck. Nobody ever brought me a buck. All right, we got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, earlier in the week, we were talking about Crisis of Character, which is a book coming out by a former Secret Service protective detail agent. And it's due out Monday. It's already a top seller in terms of pre-orders at Amazon. There's another one that came out earlier in the year called Clinton Cash. And the corporate media has been trying to pretend it isn't there and ignoring it. But it is also doing very well on Amazon, and we did link from What Really Happened to that Amazon page so you can get a copy of this book. But apparently, yesterday on his radio show, Rush Limbaugh actually took CNN's David Gergen to the woodshed for his insistence that everything that is in Peter Schweizer's book, Clinton Cash, has been completely discredited because Donald Trump's speech regarding Hillary Clinton's crimes referred to the book quite a bit. And Limbaugh basically came on out and said that Gergen has nothing to back up the claim that it's been discredited. But there's something you need to understand that's going on in the corporate media. They're going to go on protecting the Clinton lies because they were party to it all. When Clinton comes on down, when it comes out that these things really did happen, the corporate media is going to be seen as an accessory after the fact and complicit in it all. And we're seeing that on a wide variety of subjects where the media is just coming on out and say, oh, this has been discredited. This is absolutely ridiculous. You can trust us to tell you what's really going on in the world. Please trust us to tell you what's going on in the world, because if we can't convince you that up is down and left is right and black is white, then we have to give up those multi-million-dollar salaries that we all love here. Thomas Frank has come on out basically saying whatever happened to the party of the people? The Democrats appear to be just as much in bed with the money junkies as the Republicans. Hillary's out there trying to portray the Republicans as the party of big banking, but they're both the parties of big banking. Now, there's one little piece of good news coming on out. Apparently, Democratic National Committee Chairwoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz has been handed her pink slip. She's turned over her duties to Brandon Davis, who's the National Political Coordinator for the Service Employees International Union. But she gets to keep her title until the Democratic Party votes on a successor. Well, obviously, it's too little too late. The damage to Bernie Sanders has been done. The damage to the credibility of the Democratic National Committee, the damage to the credibility of the democratic and voting process in this country has already been done. And no doubt Schultz is expecting a great job with a lifelong pension in the future Clinton White House. Now, the bad news is this may be part of a deal to try and get Bernie Sanders to be Hillary's vice president, because polls of Bernie Sanders supporters are already showing half of them will not support Hillary Clinton. They're going to cross party lines and vote for whoever the GOP nominee is. Supposed to be Trump, but we're hearing the GOP is going to try and kick him out. Revealing to the American people that our democracy is a sham. It's a fraud. Remember, even the Soviet Union had elections. They didn't change anything. Remember what Stalin said. People who vote decide nothing. People who count the votes decide everything. That's what's going on in Britain right now. That's what's been going on in all of these primaries across the United States. Now, not too long ago, the Democrats started climbing all over Donald Trump because of how little money he's raised for the campaign so far. Actually, that's one of his selling points here, because he's not had a lot of money to throw into the campaign. He's been running the campaign basically with a bold message and an efficient campaign, getting the word out. And he's got a lot of grassroots support. Hillary Clinton is out there busy selling access and appointments, raking in the dough like crazy. But apparently in the last 24 hours, well, actually, since last Tuesday, Trump has raised $11 million, and he's reaching out to ordinary people. He's not going to the money junkies. He turned Sheldon Adelson's $100+ million donation down because he doesn't want Newt Gingrich as a vice president, because that would absolutely guarantee an assassination attempt on him. Now, people are still reacting to the speech. Let's see, over at Breitbart News, Levin, Trump hit it out of the park with very good speech. And he's saying Trump had the courage that the Republican leadership in Congress does not have. to go on out and say what the American people are waiting to hear. And it was received very well. Now, the good news is that Hillary's defenders always respond to questions about Chinagate, Travelgate, Cattlegate, Vince Foster by saying, it's all old news, we've been over it, there's no need to discuss it now. Donald Trump's speech has made the entire criminal career of the Clintons current events. And people are talking. Now, there's another article, and this is one of the, shall we say, darning with faint praise here. This came out of the Daily Bell. And basically saying that, yes, Trump's speech was a hit, but the corporate media is already out there saying that it really wasn't true, a lot of the things that he made. But again, as I mentioned before, the corporate media is pointing out Trump's factual inaccuracies, are relying on their own propaganda to protect their own role in those cover-ups. They're basically saying Trump is inaccurate about all these stories because back then we said it was all okay. That's it. That's what's going on. They've all seen the polls. Trust in the corporate media and the government is at an all-time record low among the American people. Now, new development in the Freddie Gray case. Officer Cesar Goodson Jr. was acquitted of all charges regarding the rough ride that killed Freddie Gray. And so I'm expecting we're going to have more staged riots and Black Lives Matter trying to create racial strife for Hillary to exploit for November. Because Hillary is definitely on that. Yeah, I will protect all you black people from the white people. Aren't you white, Hillary? Oh, I'm black inside. I'm a reverse Oreo cookie. Getting on over to the war zones. Story coming on out. This is over in Riv.com. Stephen Lenman, in an interview on Press TV, is out there saying the United States is still trying to kill Bashar al-Assad, get him out of the way of installing a puppet regime in Syria. They've never given up on that. It's been 5 years now they're trying to do that. And that's why the U.S. has been supporting all these terror groups, ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And by the way, the Syrian army took over another terrorist base near Damascus and found it stocked with U.S.-made weapons, machine guns, long-range sniper guns, anti-tank RPGs, all made in the USA. Look for that Union label when you are buying a bomb or a gun. Never mind. Rather bizarre little article that came out over at MarjorieCone.com. U.S. bombing Syrian troops would be illegal. And they're responding to this recent letter signed by 51 State Department officers calling for targeted military strikes against Bashar al-Assad, a decapitation strike, which sets a really bad precedent. Basically coming on out and saying that the U.S. bombing Syrian troops would be illegal. Well, that doesn't go far enough. When the United States bombs anybody in Syria without the permission of the Syrian government, that's illegal. And Syria does not want the U.S. there. And everybody's piling on for the eventual ground war. Apparently Norway is now sending troops down to Syria. Meanwhile, over in Iraq, Iraqi forces, apparently free from interference by the U.S. forces, have liberated al-Mashaq and Mohammed al-Musa from ISIS. Left to themselves, the Iraqis and the Syrians could clean up their own countries, but that, of course, is exactly opposite to what the U.S. agenda is. Using ISIS and Al-Qaeda to justify breaking off pieces and forming a new Kurdistan and balkanizing all these countries into little tiny countries that are easier to bully and push around. Meanwhile, the U.S. is still rattling sabers out in the South China Sea. Washington warns Beijing over South China Sea provocations. I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time with that. If China were in the Gulf of Mexico, tooling around in warships, that's a provocation. They're minding their own business. They're on their side of the world. It's the U.S. that's over there doing the provocations. Now, things may get a little bit tight here because a week from today is the official start of RIMPAC 2016, which is this huge multi-nation war game, and it's headquartered right here at Pearl Harbor. Some of the ships are already showing up. Some of the U.S. ships already have their parade lights on. And it will be an amazing display of naval hardware down there at the bottom of the hill. And the other positive, of course, is that whenever RIMPAC is happening, the Navy puts on an incredible 4th of July fireworks display because they're showing off. All these other countries are there. Look, we do fireworks, and that will be wonderful. Less pleasant than fireworks are the 280 mortar shells fired into Donetsk by the Ukrainian military. It looks like Poroshenko is trying to crank up a war there and bait Putin into doing something that could be used as a justification for escalation. And complicating Poroshenko's job right now is Ukraine's ethnic Romanians living in the Chernivtsi region are demanding autonomy. So there's already another piece of Ukraine that says we want to break off and decide for ourselves how to run our lives. Moscow has diplomatically noted that the U.S. is placing more and more restrictions on Russian diplomats in the United States, limiting where they can go, when they can go, and it's just another form of harassment. Putin, in his recent speech to the Duma, basically came out with a very accurate observation. The current international situation is remarkably similar to what was going on internationally at the start of World War II. Yeah. We know the U.S. government, every time they get into a self-created economic disaster, they get into a world war to at least distract people from it, if not to try and recover from it. Crash of 1907, World War I. Crash of 1929, World War II. Crash of 2008, here we are. I've lost count of the number of countries the U.S. has invaded, overthrown, drone-struck. Now, here in the United States of America, we have NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, and it maintains a catalog of objects in Earth orbit. The catalog numbers about 45,000 objects. Now, Russia's about to come out with their parallel catalog. There's one slight difference. The Russian catalog will list U.S. military satellites that are withheld from public view in the NORAD catalog. Putin is sending a not very subtle message that he knows where to find those U.S. military satellites just a week after demonstrating a weapon that can take those satellites down. Putin is trying to give the U.S. a reason not to start a new world war. Over in France, things are getting very tense. The riots and protesting are continuing. The American corporate media is absolutely ignoring it. And now we're seeing this story about how Holland is facing a showdown as labor law protesters defy demonstration ban. Holland was out there saying that France is turning into another dictatorship. Of course, it's part of the European Union. And they've passed all these laws. You can't criticize Israel. You can't do this. You can't do that. But you can go ahead and make fun of Mohammed all you want, because France is a free nation. But they've got all these protests against austerity and the new labor law, which is very pro-corporation and very anti-worker. And it's caused quite a schism. And Holland was getting ready to respond by simply saying, we're going to declare a ban on protests and demonstrations. You can't do it anymore. And apparently, Holland has blinked. And they've backed off and said that, yes, they do have a right to march peacefully. And I think we've hit a watershed moment because people all over the world are angry. And from this point on, everything governments do only increases that anger. So we're definitely on the edge of a precipice of a global revolution. And we don't know what the spark is going to be. Stealing the Brexit vote? Stealing the November vote? Juncker's continued arrogance and up there saying, I rule Europe, and that's, you might as well learn to love it. And people, of course, are not loving that. Down in Israel, there is still a humanitarian crisis underway. Israel has cut off water from the West Bank, from entire communities. Some are shut off completely. Some, the water's been reduced by half. And the goal is to convince the people in these communities to move somewhere else so the communities can be taken over and turned into more of these illegal settlements. Now, not too long ago, there was another shooting of Palestinians by IDF, and it came on out that the Palestinians who were killed were not part of any demonstrations. They weren't throwing any rocks. They were just bystanders. And the Israeli army has admitted the Palestinians who were shot were mistakenly hit by soldiers who were responding to reports that some Palestinians were throwing rocks and firebombs on a highway, a Jewish-only highway. And these people weren't doing it. But the soldiers heard the report, they showed up and just shot the first Palestinians they found. And Israel's really sorry it happened. Honest, we are so sorry. Look at our frowny face. We feel really, really bad about this. Apparently, Ehud Barak is out there chastising Netanyahu, saying Netanyahu's very clearly turning Israel into an apartheid state. Now, rather surprisingly, we've been talking about this New Deal, where the United States is giving Israel even more of your money for weapons and items. And Israel has so much munitions, they're selling the surplus back to American sportsmen. But apparently Barack Obama, who only has 6 months to go in office, is deciding now's the time to work on his legacy, and he is starting to talk about maybe it's time to stop subsidizing Israel's defense industry. That's not going to make Netanyahu happy at all. Got to take a break for commercials. We will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. The polls in Britain for Brexit are due to close here in about another 6 minutes. And at which point the great scam will be well and truly done here. Also, have you noticed how much wet work is going on these days? I mean, even the corporate media is looking at all these suspicious banker suicides and saying, yeah, something's going on related to Deutsche Bank and LIBOR. Now we have confirmation that some of these holistic doctors who were challenging the orthodoxy with GC math and revelations about Nagelays, they're all meeting suspicious ends. And one of them, who was declared a suicide by the government, has now been confirmed by a private medical examiner to have been a homicide. A lot of wet work. Joe Cox. And now, the former president of the United Nations General Assembly, John Ash, right in the middle of a corruption case, in which he was accused of accepting $1 million in bribes from Chinese businessmen, has been found dead in his home. The first report out said heart attack, and then everybody backed off. Ash's death was confirmed by Sergeant Vincent Ignana of the Dobbs Ferry Police Department, but he gave no further details. A younger brother in Antigua and his attorney in New York, Jeremy Schneider, confirmed the death, would not provide details about the cause. So, like I said, a lot of work going on. Also, more pink work. Apparently over at Goldman Sachs, they're announcing more layoffs. I guess life is not as good in the kingdom of money junkies anymore. And it makes sense. Before you can take money out of a society, you have to allow that society to earn it with decent wages and salaries. And I do not understand why the best minds on Wall Street and the U.S. government cannot seem to understand that. That you cannot go on raising prices, ordering people to buy more expensive health insurance, raise taxes at the same time you're trying to drive wages and salaries down. It doesn't make any sense at all. Okay, let's grab a quick phone call from Royce in Washington State. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha.
Aloha.
Mike?
Yes, you're on the air.
Okay. I've been thinking about Donald Trump running mate for some time. And a guy that he could have as a running mate and nobody would go against him would be Dr. David Duke.
I think Hillary Clinton would find a great deal of traction with David Duke as a VP. I have to be. I mean, I know David Duke. I've had him on the show. I have a lot of respect for him. But even I would be a better vice president for Donald Trump than David Duke at this point.
Okay.
And I'm available.
Yeah.
I'm available. I need a job. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
All right, we gotta let you go. Thank you very much for the phone call. We got to take a break for station ID. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 2. The polls in Great Britain are just now closing, and we just got another confirmation in. Apparently, a spokesman for the Electoral Commission has admitted that a number of the ballot counting computers being used right now only registered Remain votes in testing. But trust us, it won't change the final results one tiny bit. Okay. Let's go ahead and grab a phone call. John in Barbados. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. I want to talk just quickly about the Brexit vote. Every scam is being used. Everything. The electronic counting machines. The polls are being closed because of flooding. I mean, that's nonsense. And people who are registered to vote, I don't know if people understand, but in Britain, a letter goes out to every household in February every year. And you fill in the people who will be 18 or over on April 1st that year. So everybody over 18 is registered. And now they're turning people away because they claim they're not registered. Rubbish. Absolute garbage.
Yep.
Every little trick in the book. And I think this is going to be a big slap in the face for the British people. And I think the only cure is a 1 megaton big white flash over Brussels. That should stop it.
Well, unfortunately, no, because there's always a long waiting line of other money junkies who are going to take over those offices and do the same thing. Basically, the balance of power needs to be shifted back to the people. And we're seeing this historical pendulum where people will form a nation where the people are really in control of the government, and the government is organized to take care of the people, and over time it gets hijacked and corrupted. And we're seeing that right now. I mean, the world is in a really horrible state of fascist economic dictatorship pretty much all around the globe right now. And at some point, there's going to be a pushback. I mean, the historical reality is forget about justice and morality and ethics and fairness. History is written by a simple fact. The strong take, the weak surrender until the force of necessity is balanced on both sides, and that's when you start getting the guillotines out.
Well, I'd love to see those money junkies taking over the offices in Brussels after the 1 megaton white flash, because they'd all be well irradiated.
Well, they'll just build a new capital city, and they'll build the European Union people for it.
We want to get on to the war zones now. The Iraqi army now is making massive progress in pushing the Takfiris out of ISIS and Daesh and all these other nonsense groups.
Yes.
Out of Raqqa, and they're now forming up around Mosul for an attack there. And I would think that Erdogan should be very nervous because they're going to be on top of his troops who are stationed just outside Mosul.
Well, again, without U.S. interference, Syria and Iraq would have scrubbed out all these terrorist groups a long time ago. But the U.S. is using these terrorist groups as proxies to redraw the map of the Middle East. They're talking about balkanizing Iraq. And the game plan here is to take all these nations like Iraq and Iran and break them into little tiny pieces that are going to be easier for Israel and the U.S. to bully and push around. That's what they want to do.
Well, unfortunately, I think that's going to be a failure, because if the Iraqi army and the Syrian Arab army are successful, the balkanization ain't going to happen.
Well, I wish I was as confident, because what we're seeing now with that letter from 51 State Department employees, the U.S. is willing to go all the way to get what it wants. even to dropping this whole idea that they're in Syria to target the terrorist groups only, and come on out and say, yeah, it was really all about getting rid of Assad, and what are you slaves going to do about it anyway? And go ahead and do a decapitation strike. That will be a very, very dangerous precedent, because there's sort of been an unwritten rule of warfare. You don't go after the leadership in either country, and that makes it easier for them to sit back and send other people's children out to die. But if you start targeting each other's leadership, then it's open season. And maybe that would actually be a good thing, when all these leaders who are so pro-war all of a sudden realize they themselves could be targets.
Well, I'm looking at the situation from outside of the American media nonsense, because they're not even reporting on that huge riot that took place in Barking, South London.
Yeah, there's been nothing about that. Nobody said what the cause was. Nobody said what that was about, other than it was a large disturbance. Have you got anything additional on that?
Not at the moment, but what I'm getting is lots of people we know in the UK over Skype are saying that this nonsense with the Brexit vote is going on everywhere.
You mean the vote fraud, and of course it's got to go on everywhere. And it's like I said earlier in the show, the Eurocrats have spent decades and invested trillions of dollars to enslave all of Europe to their little corporate fascist economic dictatorship, and they're not going to let a little thing like the voters get in their way now. And that's exactly the way they think. Democracy is an illusion to keep the slaves obedient and happy. But it isn't real. It's not real in the Eurozone. It's not real here in the United States of America. It's just a little play acting they go through so people will quietly accept more abuse and more exploitation, because in their minds they believe that somehow or other they voted for this.
Well, unfortunately, in France now, people are going on strike like this. You know, everybody. The whole country is grinding to a halt. And if this happens, that they steal this vote in Britain, we still do have unions in Britain.
Well, a general strike would be very effective. I mean, that's how Gandhi got the British out of India. You know, with relatively blood-free. Just everybody sat down and refused to be part of the machine anymore. And it's a very effective tactic. Anyway, we have to take a minute. Hang on a second, John. We have to take a minute to welcome our on-air affiliates back to the show here. And we're talking about the ramifications of the Brexit. There are more and more reports coming out. Apparently, a lot of the voting machines being used for the Brexit are only counting Remain votes. When the Leave votes go through the machine, they do not register. Vote stealing doesn't get any more obvious than that.
Yeah. What I can say is, though, I've been listening to several trade unions, and one of the leaders of the largest trade union in Britain, the Transport and General Workers Union, they're ready for strike action already.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised at all. And we're really on the threshold of a global uprising against the money junkies. The question is, what will be the spark that really gets it going? And I keep thinking back to what happened in Romania under Ceausescu. 2 weeks before it all came apart, walking around Romania, you would have thought everything was just fine. And then all of a sudden, there's a riot at a sporting event that turns into a spontaneous political rally, and 2 weeks later, Ceausescu was machine-gunned to death on Romanian national TV. It could happen that fast all around the globe. This push for a global government and a global private central bank has created a political climate that could easily give rise to a global revolution.
And the idea that Brexit would cause economic hardship in Britain is nonsense, because the trading between Europe and Britain would still take place. Germany's not going to stop sending all its BMWs and Mercedes and other high-value products to Britain. It would, on top of the Russian sanctions, it would kill the German economy dead.
It absolutely would, but, the EU commissioners are completely disconnected from real life in the European Union, and they may just say, this is an order, nobody in the EU is allowed to trade with Britain, and it's going to harm the EU even more. It's going to anger people against the EU even more. And Britain's going to be sending their BMWs down to Saudi Arabia and here to the United States and all the rest of it. And like I said, the demographic breakdown where the younger people were voting Remain and the older people were voting to Leave is very easy to understand. The young people have never known any life other than being part of the EU. And the older people remember how much better life was before that supranational dictatorship took hold.
Well, my final comment on this issue is, we've got 28 nations where so-called free trade takes place, but there's 168 other nations on the planet, for goodness sake, that Britain can trade with.
Yes.
Without restriction, without being restricted in that trade by the EU.
See, that's the funny thing. This EU trading bloc was supposed to be a free trade zone, and it isn't. The EU keeps passing all these new regulations and restrictions to just absolutely control all aspects of the Eurozone's economy. And the net result of all of these policies is the European countries are in serious economic trouble. Britain and Germany are the only economies still able to sustain the load of propping up all those other EU nations. If Great Britain were to leave the European Union, if there's a mass riot on Whitehall and Number 10 in Parliament, and they just kick them all out and say, all right, we're putting in a new parliament, we're leaving the EU, Germany would follow immediately. And we have all these other nations, France, the Netherlands, Denmark are already talking about getting on out because the EU has been a disaster for them.
Absolutely, and the European currency is also another disaster.
Yeah, it's in serious trouble.
Yeah. Okay, Mike, well, thanks for having me on again.
All right.
And carry on the good work.
I'll do my best. Thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go. Now, Saudi Arabia has declared a ceasefire in this oil war. And this is a classic example of foreign policy coming out of the U.S. government that was not thought through very carefully before it was implemented. Somebody just said, we'll crush oil prices, it will harm Russia, and they stopped thinking at that point. And yes, Russia's economy took a hit because they're an oil and gas exporter, but Russia's economy was a lot more resilient. They're not a one-crop economy the way Saudi Arabia is. And the harm from this poorly thought-out oil war backflashed onto Saudi Arabia, onto Venezuela, onto U.S. oil companies, the fracking industry, Canada, and all across Europe. It caused much more damage to our side than to its intended target. And Saudi Arabia is in serious economic trouble. They've had to sell government bonds for the first time in decades. And they're saying, and Saudi Arabia's just thrown their hands up and said, the glut is over. We're going to start shutting those valves. We need to go back to what life was before this ridiculous oil price war. Now, somebody has done an analysis. This is over at Investment Watch blog, and they've discovered that for the average American, just paying the price of your hospital care is cheaper than buying the government-mandated Obamacare insurance and then paying the deductibles on that. You're actually money ahead if you don't buy insurance at all under the current system. And apparently, it's a huge difference. 5 times cheaper paying cash for your hospital bills than trying to go through that Obamacare nightmare. Obamacare was not about health. It was not about affordable health. It was about forcing you to give more of your money to health insurance companies, who would then give a mafia-like piece of the action to the U.S. government in taxes. And it's failed utterly, which is why they're already pushing hottest year on record, because they're going to hit you with a carbon tax as soon as November's elections are over. Getting on to the immigration situation, have Germans reached their breaking point over the Muslim invasion of their country? It sure seems to be heading that way. We're seeing more and more indications on social media that everybody is just really furious. Over at LiveLeak, they've got a very gruesome, I'm going to give you an advance warning, it's a photograph of a 54-year-old woman killed by an asylum seeker in Ottakring, Vienna. And this young man just attacked this 54-year-old woman with an iron bar and just crushed her skull. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that these Soros-backed NGOs were luring refugees to Europe with promises of free stuff. And of course, the free stuff wasn't there. They're not getting free homes, free cars, free cable. And they're angry, and they're taking out their anger on the nearest available target, which happens to be the Europeans. Apparently there's been a clash broke out in Paris between street vendors and shoppers. This forced migration has been an absolute disaster because it was based on an intellectual fraud. This idea that you can reshape what's inside a person's head by changing the environment around them. It doesn't work as an absolute. And yet all of the liberal political philosophy is founded on that illusion. Let's take another phone call. Henry in Connecticut. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes. Guten Tag. All right.
Guten Tag. Wie geht's es Ihnen?
Called about the EU thing, but I'm going to interject just on what you said just now. Look, I think this multiculturalism, multiracial garbage from these baby boomer generation that's once born, I think, from the 1940s to maybe like early 60s. But those are the younger ones, like Obama in the early 1960s.
Yeah.
Has always been S-H-I-T. I'm not going to say the word on the air.
Please don't. We're not allowed to. We may be dropping white-hot flaming death all across the world, but we will not say bad words on the radio to prove we are a just and moral people.
Yeah, well, I think this stuff is making this country. In this country, it's garbage. They've been forcing that stuff down our throat for years. Europe gets a taste of the American idealistic, which I never had respect of countries like that anyway, than like Norway as far as having that kind of idealistic, even strong moral stuff sexually than those European countries. To me, was a disgrace. But now, though the EU is really like what you had on there with that guy Robert, what's his name? I'm trying to think of his name. Who talks about the EU?
Yeah.
The American disease. It is the Americanization and downgrading of Europe.
Okay, now you're a little off point here because the U.S. is a principal tool for this agenda, but it hasn't originated with them. It's part of this idea of trying to create a single global government and a whole planet enslaved to a single global private central bank. And part of their plan, actually, it's these families who own the central banks, and they're spread all over Europe. But part of the plan is, they in order to make us easier to control, they're attacking our sense of self, our sense of identity, and they're trying to erase our sense of regional, cultural, historic identity. We're still seeing attacks on the Confederate flag. They're trying to get us all confused about what gender we are and what restroom we should be using. And the whole idea of forcing the refugees into Europe and the illegal immigrants and refugees into the United States is to blur us all together into one easy-to-control mass of workers and soldiers.
Yeah, but I want to tell you something about that. With my age group, like the Generation Xers, and the ones a little younger than me, like the Generation Y, so-called Generation Y, they call. That stuff is not working, because I'm going to tell you something quickly. I'm going to ask you a question with the EU, but I came from a place like down in New York that's near Long Island, a dump like Queens. And more and more as I was growing up, this was before I was a teenager though, but as I was coming up even through the teens, it got worse and worse. And all you had was all this third world, low-wage third world immigrant stuff. And that stuff never changed me as far as what kind of girl I wanted, what kind of friends I wanted to hang with, and so forth and so on. It seemed like it was just a bunch of inferior. I mean, not just that. I mean, there was other things, too, that had nothing to do with immigration at all. In general, that was just a lot of inferior, downgraded crap forced down our throats. I mean, I used to talk to people in Richmond Hill, Queens. They would tell me that. And even I remember when they said Bob Brandt, and I'm not going to agree with everything with Bob Brandt, but I remember hearing him and other people in the early 1990s. That stuff never worked. It's just like it was just inferior junk and crap. And it's not just immigration, other stuff too, just forced down our throats. But it didn't really change anything, because I remember back then people talking about going to, Germany and how they are sexually there, how some of the girls there are more beautiful, this and that. I want to go to Sweden, I want to go to this. So, I mean, they forced that stuff and make us think we're supposed to look up to anything, just come here to work and work hard or whatever. That's what.
Yeah, all right. Well, listen, Henry, I'm going to have to let you go here.
Anyway, I'll move quickly.
You want
to hang out right away.
Well, no, we got to take a break for commercials. I'm sorry, we ran out of time. Thank you for the phone call. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. In responding to Henry's phone call where he was criticizing Europe because they don't run their sex lives the way he thinks they ought to, it strikes me as kind of a bit of a double standard where you resent other people's cultures being rammed down our throats, and then you turn around and say, well, these other people don't live the way I think they ought to. Now, I lived and worked in Europe back in the 1980s on some film projects, computer animation stuff. And yes, they're very different about certain practices, very comfortable with their bodies. And you've probably been reading lately about how there's this German naturist resort that's been there for a very, very long time, and the government's building an asylum center on the other side of the lake and is trying to tell these naturists they can't skinny dip anymore because it's going to offend these people from the Middle East. Well, when I was in Europe in the 1980s, I understood. I was a guest in somebody else's home. And I did not have a right to come in and say, you must change your behavior to suit me. And these asylum seekers and illegal immigrants ought to have the same courtesy. But they don't. And there lies much of the friction. And the German government should have the same attitude that Teddy Roosevelt did. If you come into our country, you live your life like this is your country. And we're not going to tell our people that they can't go skinny dipping anymore just because you're uncomfortable with it. Look the other way. There's a thing underneath your head called a neck, and it's flexible. You can turn. Lower than that, there are these two things called feet, and you can use them to look in a different direction. It is ridiculous. Now, getting on the issue of immigration. Okay, that hum is coming from the RBN side. The Supreme Court finally came down on this immigration issue where Obama wanted to give illegal immigrant parents amnesty to stay in the U.S. If they'd had a baby here in the U.S. And, of course, a lot of illegal immigrants were coming across the border and immediately, popping out a kid to take advantage of that. And the Supreme Court basically had a split decision, 4-4, and if Scalia were still alive, it would have been 5-4 against. But because it was a tie, it let stand a lower court ruling saying that President Obama does not have the authority to just write laws from the desk of the Oval Office, which is true. Obama immediately went on TV whining and crying and throwing a little tantrum that he's not getting his way. But he did admit defeat and saying that he can't take any additional executive actions on immigration. He shouldn't have taken them in the first place. That's not what the executive order is for. The executive order is an order by the president to the executive branch to implement the will of Congress. Now, Congress, as a courtesy, has often allowed executive orders to stand after 30 days. Which is the time period they have to review and repeal it if they want. But it's not a license for stroke-of-the-pen law of the land. And Obama, as a supposed constitutional professor, should have known that. Okay, so let's get back over to Orlando. It's finally starting to fade away from the corporate media. I think they're realizing they botched this one badly. And nobody is buying the official story. Over at 21 Wire, they're talking about all the strange games with the transcripts of the 911 calls and the fact that the audios themselves still have not been released. Now, the official story is still focusing on a lone gunman, and yet recovered phones from the Pulse nightclub have recordings of Omar Mateen talking on his phone to somebody else about tactics, what to do. So he wasn't a lone gunman. Now, okay, we got to take a break. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're talking about what's been going on in Orlando. Now, normal police procedure all across the United States of America, including Orlando, in an active shooter situation. Police respond with what is known as an active rescue. The first 4 to 5 officers that get to the scene will enter as a contact team. Their purpose is to stop the threat by confronting the shooter. And supposedly the first 4 officers there succeeded in forcing whoever was doing the shooting into the restroom. At that point, they were ordered out and told to wait for SWAT to arrive, which took 3 hours. That's not standard procedure. That's not how these things are done. It's another reason to suspect that official story. And like I said, the corporate media has pretty much dropped it. They haven't gotten traction with it. I think Loretta Lynch coming on out and saying they'd lost the shooter's wife or misplaced her, or maybe she's in the witness protection program. And getting on back to this issue about prescription antidepressants, there's another story that just came out at Blacklisted News that apparently Omar Mateen was seen by his friends researching the effects of psychotropic drugs. And apparently his friends were saying he had gone through a significant personality change shortly before the shooting. We've all seen that before, haven't we? And if you haven't, go over to ssristories.org and you will read a lot of these things going on about these very, very dangerous medications. But, we're going to blame the guns. We're going to blame homophobia. Oh, he's gay. All right, it was a revenge killing. It was ISIS. It was this. It was that. They changed the story so many times they destroyed their own credibility. Over in Germany, there was a gunman who took hostages at a movie theater. The original report was 50 people had been injured. That turned out to be inaccurate. The German police went in there, killed the gunman. Nobody was injured. What a shame we don't have German police down in Orlando, because they obviously know how to deal with these situations. Now, Oliver Stone, and I'm a great admirer of his ever since JFK, and I never got to work with him during my career, which I deeply, deeply regret. He's coming out with 2 movies. One is ready for release. The other one is going to be out closer to the end of the year. The first one is called Ukraine on Fire. It's a documentary, and it's already been shown at the 62nd Taormina Film Festival in Messina, Taormina, Italy. And nobody knows if Stone has a distributor. My guess is it's going to be very, very hard for him to find one, because this documentary is about how the U.S. engineered the coup d'etat against Ukraine's legitimate elected government and put Poroshenko in, setting the stage for all the bloodshed and chaos that has ensued. Now, Stone has another movie coming on out sometime later this year. They don't have a firm release date. It's called simply Snowden, and it's a retelling of the Edward Snowden story, and the revealing to the world that the U.S. National Security Agency is spying on everybody. Can't be bothered catching the ransomware writers, can't be bothered, stopping the theft of computer data. That's not their charter, apparently. Just spying on everybody. That's it. Basically cyber stalking everybody on the planet. So good for Oliver Stone, and we'll be keeping an eye on these films as they come on out. Speaking of snooping, GCHQ, under the new Snoopers Charter, will be licensed to hack an entire town if they feel it's necessary. The Snoopers Charter will allow GCHQ to literally break into every phone and every computer in an entire town. The proviso is as long as it's overseas. And if anybody thinks GCHQ is going to confine this ability to outside the country, I have some of Saddam Hussein's nuclear weapons to sell you. Now, the good news is the FBI was trying to get a law passed to allow warrantless access to all Internet browsing histories. And that was narrowly defeated in the Senate. So I guess you can stop visiting totally random websites and loading up your browser history with junk to confuse the issue. Let's take a phone call. Steve in California. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hey, Michael. Hey, on the Orlando shooting, I would just assume, since there's cameras almost on every building these days to kind of, watch for security issues and stuff like that, were there any cameras at all pointing in that direction of the shooting and the club itself?
There was one camera that supposedly caught the initial confrontation outside in the parking lot, but it doesn't really show who any of those people were. What's really amazing is that the Pulse had its own security cameras, but apparently we're being told that they were down for maintenance or they were malfunctioning or some other such nonsense as that.
Well, that's convenient, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Thanks, Michael.
All right. Thank you very much for the phone call. Now, Democrats are throwing a collective tantrum over the Senate voting down these 4 gun measures the other day, which broke poor Kim Kardashian's heart so much. And so they're literally having a sit-in on the floor of the House of Representatives to try and force some kind of a gun grabber bill to be considered and voted through. 68 members of Congress, not exactly enough to constitute a mandate. But they're out there still saying that, terrorists and criminals are out to kill the American people, so we should all turn in our guns and let the police protect us, even though the police are actually killing more innocent Americans than the mass shooters and terrorists put together. And as a little reminder from down in Woodside, South Carolina, 13-year-old boy was at home when he detected 2 criminals breaking into his house. He grabbed his mother's firearm and he drove them off, killing one of them. Now, these 2 who were breaking into the house were hardened felons with prior crime records, prior jail time. And this 13-year-old kid successfully defended his home with a legally owned firearm. No police were there. The police didn't stop the crime, did they? Gun grabbers. When a crime happens, there are only 2 parties present: the perpetrator and the victim. And if you really want crime and terror to stop, the only possible option is to arm the victims. I've been through this myself when I was living in Southern California. I drove a burglar out of our house with a firearm. I'm very fortunate I did not have to pull the trigger. Just the gun being there was enough to discourage the criminal. And that's what we're really talking about, a deterrence. Now, I'm constantly getting emails from the gun grabbers saying, oh, your idea of a solution is to have everybody inside that nightclub shooting at everybody else. No, that's not what we want. The point of arming the victims, of allowing law-abiding Americans to carry guns, is not to trigger a wild shootout when the bad guys show up. The point of allowing law-abiding Americans to carry firearms is so that the bad guys will decide not to show up at all. Isn't that a good solution? Why do you have a problem with that? One thing about the gun grabbers, their idea is that a woman lying dead, raped and strangled with her own pantyhose in an alley is somehow morally superior to that same woman explaining to the police how her attacker got shot. Okay. Did we do Rick in Florida yet? Okay, Rick, are you there? Aloha, Rick. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike, big fan. Just talking about Orlando. The majority of those people that died probably died from blood loss. The AR-15, the .556 caliber round, that's what it's designed to do. It's designed to create a wound channel and massive blood loss. When they designed it away from the .308 caliber, it was designed so that when they wounded the military bad guy, it took 2 of his friends to cart him back away.
Yeah, that's why military weapons
people, I bet you.
Yeah, that's why military weapons are designed to wound, not to kill. They still kill anyway. But even the chief of police of Orlando is acknowledging that probably a lot of those people in that club were killed and injured by the SWAT team storming in. And when you consider that according to some of these officers who've gone public, they had the shooter cornered in the restroom and then were ordered out. then all of the blood and carnage in that club falls on the hands of whoever issued that order.
You know, when we're talking about these suspicious shootings, and the last caller, which prompted me to call, talking about an inside camera, Michael, are you aware that there's cameras inside movie theaters, as in like Aurora?
Yes.
The actual cameras inside the movie theater by the screen that leads out towards the where the people sit.
Yes.
If you go to any major movie theater and you ask these people, they'll tell you there's cameras in there.
Yeah.
We don't know anything about any of that.
Well, part of them are for security. The other part of them is market research, is they watch the faces of the people watching the movie and look for reactions to find out what part of the movie is working and what part isn't. You especially see this in the test screenings of an edited print before it actually goes into distribution and release. And they'll sort of fine-tune the movie for the audience that way. But yes, there are cameras in movie theaters. And they run in the infrared, but we never have any videos coming on out to support the official story in any of these shootings.
And why don't we have any video to support the story if that's the story, right?
Because the videos don't support the official story. Anything that doesn't support the official story has to disappear.
And lastly, Michael, have you noticed that the focus is always on the AR-15?
Oh,
is
yeah.
that because that all the ammo that DHS bought was .556 caliber?
No. The focus on the AR-15, basically the focus is on all military-style assault rifles. Because if a conflict rises between the government and the American people, they want the American people to not have these military-style weapons. The reality is that these military-style weapons, they may be the stars in all of these staged shootings, but the reality is they're actually used very little in real, ordinary street crime. Handguns far more, knives, hammers, bad doctors are all killing a lot more Americans. The obsession with the AR-15 and AK-47 is so that the American people not be allowed military weapons with which to deter an aggressive government. And yet you can read right in that Second Amendment, they're talking about military weapons to protect the security of a free state. And the United States Supreme Court ruled in United States versus Miller that the Second Amendment reserves to the American people the same weapons as those carried by the uniformed forces. So if the police department has an AR-15 with a 30-round clip, you are allowed to have the same under that Supreme Court ruling.
I really thank you for championing the cause of common sense and liberty. And it's thank God we have you, Eric. You know, I mean, I'm very happy that we have you.
Well, thank you very much for the kind words, and I'm going to keep on going as long as I can keep on going here. And it gets a little discouraging and depressing at times. Anyway, thank you for the phone call. We're going to let you go. Now, as you know, one of the things the United States government was doing all during the war in Iraq is they were torturing innocent Iraqis to death to find nuclear weapons of mass destruction which never existed. I'm sure all you Kafka fans out there are going to take notice about that. And as it turned out, the CIA hired a group of psychologists to set up the most effective torture facility that they could. They did far worse things than waterboarding. That's why they don't want these remaining detainees in Guantanamo to ever be seen in public again, because their bodies bear scars that were not made by tap water. And apparently over 8 years, the CIA spent $81 million creating the U.S. torture program. So they can't say it was just some overzealous mid-level officers who were doing this. They were spending $10 million a year trying to find out the best way to torture people, to get politically convenient confessions, because that's all torture gets. Even torture experts are saying, no, torture does not get you reliable intelligence information. What it gets you is the victim being tortured will say whatever they think is going to stop the pain. Yes, I shot down the Hindenburg. Yes, I nailed Jesus to the cross. I killed Kennedy and Lincoln. But if you need a politically expedient confession, that's what you use torture for. They only had to waterboard Khalid Sheikh Mohammed 180 times to get him to confess to 9/11. Oh, actually, he didn't do that after the waterboarding. They locked his kids in metal boxes with biting insects and had him listen to their screams. That's when he confessed to 9/11. Now, if you are a fan of drones, and they are rather cool. I like the idea of a drone that could actually carry a nice high-resolution camera for aerial shots. And I did have a little drone that we got at Sam's Club. Unfortunately, it died after about a month. I had just barely gotten to the point of being able to control this thing. But they are fun. Well, the FAA has now issued a directive saying that drones below a certain weight can be flown without a license. If your drone weighs less than 55 pounds, you don't have to get a drone license. And I think it's a good compromise because drones are everywhere now. And some have cameras and high def and the rest of it, and a lot of them will carry GoPros. And they are very useful for getting a view of things that you can't see on the ground, like overview of an archaeological excavation. And yes, I know a lot of people are peeking in windows, but, at that point, I think the drone becomes fair game. But if you're a drone enthusiast, you can have a drone up to 55 pounds in weight, and obviously you need to stay away from airports and any place else where it might run into something. But you can go ahead and fly that thing. And they are very cool. And I was very, very impressed because what makes a drone easy to fly are the onboard gyros and computers. So it doesn't really take a lot of skill. And it really was kind of fun while it lasted. And I know Sam's will give me a new one if I go back and complain, but I really don't want to buy any more products that I have to replace every month. Use it a month, go back and get a new one under warranty. Use it another month, go back and get a new one under warranty. I want something that's going to be there, ready when I need it. We don't seem to have a lot of that in this country. Alrighty, we got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And the bizarreness over the Brexit vote is continuing. They haven't officially counted any of the votes yet. The YouGov poll says Remain has a 4-point lead. And you need to remember, YouGov was on the side of Remain. They were on the side of keeping Scotland in the United Kingdom, so they have a bias going in. Leave EU has their poll that has Leave 52% over Remain at 48%. So we got two conflicting polls. No votes counted, and somebody has started posting all over Twitter that Boris Johnson has conceded that Brexit has failed. No word from Boris himself. Just more propaganda and more distortions, and it's ridiculous. All right, let's take a phone call. Mo in Florida, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. Thanks for taking my call. I kind of go back to what we were talking about earlier with the shootings, and something that just doesn't make sense to me that just tells me that there are the gun grabbers out there, because when you look around the world in these troubled Mideastern countries, wherever, they're all about suicide bombers. I mean, very seldom do they use guns. And if they banned every gun, if they took every gun, if they want to say there's a radical Muslims, they just wear these suicide vests. They can't pat everybody down in every mall, in every theater. There hasn't been one suicide bomber. I mean, thank God, but it makes no sense whatsoever. If there's radical Muslims here, this is their modus operandi. This is what they would do, and there is no way
but you see, they've already destroyed the radical Muslim propaganda. I mean, first they were saying homophobe, then Omar Mateen turned out to be gay. Then they tried to say that, this was a revenge killing because one of his lovers had AIDS and didn't tell him. And they keep thrashing the story around where nobody believes any of this stuff. But the hard reality is, throughout history, gun bans only disarm the law-abiding citizen. Criminals will still get guns. They'll smuggle them in right alongside the drugs. I mean, look how effective the ban on illegal drugs has been at keeping drugs off the streets of America. You think the gun ban's going to be any better? Of course not. Plus the fact
that a suicide bomber could go anywhere.
Yeah, or somebody, setting off a bomb and blaming it on a suicide bomber. But to get back to the point about the gun ban nonsense, guns are easy to make. And the gun that was used to kill Joe Cox was reported to be a homemade weapon. And that's why banning guns from law-abiding citizens only disarms the law-abiding citizens. It doesn't take guns away from the criminals. And you have to wonder which side is the U.S. government on, because that government's been spending your tax dollars to give military-style weapons to Mexican drug criminals and terrorist groups in Syria, and who knows where all else.
So there's no suicide bombers in the United States, obviously. That must mean there's no radical Muslims, because that's what they usually use.
Well, the whole radical Muslim thing is part of the propaganda to justify more wars on the Middle East. They can't get up there and say that we're conquering the Mideast to bring the oil under U.S. economic control. No parent's going to send their son or daughter off to fight in that. They have to invent an enemy to get you to go to war. We've got to take a break for our top-of-the-hour station identification. Thank you very much for the phone call, Mo. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And apparently Nigel Farage has come out and made a statement that he's been told by the people counting the Brexit vote that Remain is going to win. So the money junkies get their way. And the next question is going to be, how many people in Britain are going to believe this happened? And my advice to the British people is do a little survey amongst yourself and your friends. How many people voted Remain and how many people voted to leave? And decide for yourself if this was an honest election. The fact that they canceled all the exit polls except the one by YouGov, which was very much pro-Remain. They were also on the side of keeping Scotland inside the United Kingdom. So they came into this thing with a bias. But decide for yourself if this election was crooked or not. We know the powers that be rig elections. They only believe in democracy if you vote for what they want. And if you're not, well, too bad. All righty, let's see. We're going to take a phone call. Katie in Texas, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. I wanted to briefly touch on that article that you had mentioned about that boy who drove that intruder out with his mother's gun. And I think you made the comment that he had the gun legally. And anyway, I guess I take a little bit of issue with that. And I don't know what you meant by that legally. If it was registered, is that what you meant by that?
Well, it was his mother's firearm, and it was registered to her. And apparently she had taught her child how to use the gun safely because there were actually 2 intruders. He hit them both and fired on them as they drove away and hit their car a couple of times. So the kid is able to place his shots. And we had this wonderful video that was on WhatReallyHappened.com the other day about this 7-year-old girl firing an AR-15. And you just watch how carefully, I presume it's her father, is teaching her about trigger finger discipline and how to do the magazine and how to do this all very, very safely. And this little 7-year-old girl thinks it's all very cool. And it stands in stark contrast to this liberal pundit who was out there saying how he was traumatized by firing an AR-15. All right, well, if you're traumatized by firing an AR-15, don't fire an AR-15. But that doesn't give you grounds to go on out and tell those of us who know how to use firearms safely that we should stop doing so.
Absolutely, I agree. And I guess my issue, Mike, I figured it was a licensed weapon. I'd like to revisit the Second Amendment to the Constitution, which says that the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. That license right there is an infringement upon that second article, period. So legally, perhaps. Lawfully, absolutely not. And also, you had mentioned, I just caught just a bare glance of it, but something about how we're to be able to have, I think, the same power fire as the police. Well, I'd like to just read a portion of a quote by a Tench Cox way back when this whole thing was being debated. He says, Congress have no power to disarm the militia. Their swords and every other terrible implement of the soldier are the birthright of an American, period. So, whatever the military has, we can have it. And it doesn't have to be licensed or anything, period. According to that Second Amendment, shall not be infringed. These people are traitors. They have committed treason against the American people, and they should be dealt with according to the consequences of treason.
Okay, now let me back up here a little bit. I know there's a lot of people who are very, very concerned that the registration of firearms is the next step toward government confiscation, and that's certainly a real concern. But you need to understand, anytime government licenses anything, your car, your boat, your ability to drive, your firearm, your radio transmitters, any of that stuff, it's all really about making more money off of you. Because that's how government grows rich and powerful. They take away something you already freely have, then they'll sell it back to you. Okay?
And which we don't need permission, which is a God, granted right to protect our life. Again, these people they have committed treason, and they need to be dealt with.
Okay,
period.
well, I don't want to get into treason and the punishment for treason or anything, but you have hit an important point here. Certainly, we Americans we do have a right to keep and bear arms equal to those in the hands of criminals. And we know that Mexican drug criminals are being given these assault-style military weapons by the U.S. government at taxpayer expense. And I remember a while back where Joe Biden came on out and said, well, you don't need an AR-15. You can defend your home with a shotgun. And, shotgun is something the U.S. government is less afraid of when they have all the Kevlar and everything. But I pointed out, if you have a hostage situation in your home, let's see, if somebody's broken into your home and they're holding your wife, in front of them. If you fire a shotgun, you're going to hit both of them. And maybe Biden is hoping that's going to happen and he can trade up to a new trophy wife or something. But with an AR-15 and a laser sight, you can put that bullet in the perpetrator's forehead and the hostage is going to be unharmed. But it really, you cannot escape the conclusion that the U.S. government is desperate to disarm the American people, even at the expense of making us vulnerable to more crime. Because being able to control us is more important to them than our health and safety. And it's not just guns where we see that. We see that with vaccinations. We see it with GMOs. All these bad, dangerous products that are out there. Our government
what's the solution, Michael? I mean, we know the problem. What is the solution?
Well, my solution is to recognize that this government and economic system are in the process of self-destruction. And we just need to wait it out. I really do think the U.S. government is going to collapse the way the former Soviet Union did. There's going to be about 4 months where we're going to have to be looking out for our friends and neighbors ourselves. We're going to have to deal with a collapsed supply chain, and that's going to be really harmful because of our enforced dependency on that supply chain. And then we're going to put together a new country. We're going to reestablish basic constitutional principles. We're going to add one to it saying no more private central banks ever, 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 ever. And life will be better in the United States, just like life in the Russian republics is greatly improved over what it was under Stalin.
No secret societies, no collectives, period. And anybody that's found trying to do that crap, period. They're tried in one of our common law courts, just like we're afforded according to the Bill of Rights, not their admiralty court.
Okay, well, we can work out the fine details later on here, but again, I am adamantly opposed to any kind of a violent revolution in this country, because if there's one thing this government knows how to do, it's kill people, and they won't hesitate.
Michael, we're the best armed military on the face of this the face of this earth. How many guns per household? We could, and I hear people talk about, but they have these, super powerful, never, it could never happen. You guys would just get slaughtered. Well, yeah, some of us would get slaughtered. But if everybody stood up, we're armed.
Yeah, but
to
Katie, okay, the instant somebody starts something like that, and there have been a couple of occasions where I think the U.S. government wants that to happen, and they can declare a national emergency, and they'll start taking guns away from people that they know are not going to fight back. They'll even use chemical weapons. They're already giving chemical weapons to their pet terrorists in Syria to use on the Syrian army. They won't hesitate to do the same. This government, these money junkies globally, would not hesitate to kill off 20% of the human race as long as the surviving 80% were loyal slaves afterwards. That's the way they think.
The Georgia Guidestones. That's their intent, right?
I still don't know what the Guidestones are supposed to represent. I know somebody made a change to it recently. I know they get vandalized an awful lot. Anyway, Katie, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go here and get on back to our news here. And again, I think we need to draw our inspiration from Gandhi because the practical reality, yes, there are 80% of American households have firearms, and the people in them hopefully are trained in their use. The big question is, Are the American people as a whole ready for an armed revolt? And I think the answer has to be a big no. I think if the government were to say there's a gun ban, you have until, November 1st to turn them on in, I think most Americans would just go ahead and turn them in. I think anybody pushing for an armed revolt, it's a bad idea. We know the system is self-destructing. Let's not give them the excuse to declare themselves a dictatorship and just let them follow the Soviet Union into the dustbin of history. That's our best course of action. Okay? If I thought a revolution was the right idea, I'd tell you so. I don't think it is. Now then, getting back to the lousy products we have living underneath fascism, apparently there is a problem where people who have allowed their computers to be upgraded from Windows 7 and Windows 8 to Windows 10 can't activate the Windows 10. There's a problem. It won't activate. So basically, Microsoft is forcing people to migrate from perfectly good working Windows 7 and Windows 8 computers to upgrade to something that won't even start. Isn't life under fascism grand? They don't even bother testing this stuff anymore. Oh, the customers will tell us what the problems are. We'll get around to fixing it. Now, interestingly enough, there's a mobile advertising company over in Singapore, in Mobi, and apparently the U.S. government has just fined them $950,000 for secretly collecting Americans' location data from their smartphones via Wi-Fi. 20% of those affected are located in North America. And I know we're all concerned about our right to privacy, but my concern is how quickly the U.S. government can go after a foreign ad company that's tracking your location data, but won't do anything about Hillary's confirmed violation of Title 18, Section 793, and the handling of classified documents. You go back and you look, and you have all these people who are professionals in the military and intelligence who are all saying the tremendous risk that Hillary placed this country in with her weak private email server. And now we're finding out there was a 2-week interval where anybody could have logged into it from anywhere. When Guccifer, and by the way, I've been told it's Guccifer, like Gucci the shoe, Guccifer. When Guccifer logged in, he found 10 foreign IPs prowling around there. And I still think there's a question there that needs to be asked. Was Hillary Clinton repeating the 1996 Chinagate scandal? Was she selling U.S. secrets to foreign interests, using her weak email server to deliver the secrets and using that charitable foundation to collect and launder the payments? Because a lot of foreign money came into that charitable foundation. And it doesn't do a lot of charity. It does just enough to get the media to say, oh, the Clinton Foundation is doing charity. And there was that Wall Street forensic economist who said, based on the public filings, there are literally billions of dollars that have gone into the Clinton Foundation and nobody knows where the money went. Probably a lot of it is funding some of these groups supporting Hillary Clinton's presidency, like her online attack squads. Now, if you live in Southern California, this is a story you need to be paying attention to. It's been around for about a week, but I'm just getting to it now. There's apparently some very slow ground movement along a very long stretch of the San Andreas Fault. In some areas, the ground is rising. In other areas, it's sinking. And it's very, very slow. But it is an area of concern. And it's in an area where pressure has been building up for more than a century. And seismologists in Southern California are saying they're way overdue for a major earthquake. Now, we have been seeing, ever since the Fukushima quake, we have been seeing the entire Pacific plate sort of twitching around and readjusting. And we've been getting increased major quakes all around the Ring of Fire. North from Japan, across the Arctic, south from Japan, across the Southern Pacific, up the coast of South America. We've been seeing all those quakes down there. And so at this point, I think you need to understand it's possible and even more likely you're going to get hit with a big one. And Claire and I went through a big one ourselves. We were located very close to the hypocenter of the Northridge earthquake. We lost about half of everything we had. We had cracks in our walls so wide you could stand in the living room and look right outside at the neighbor's place. So, please have your earthquake kits in good order. Drag them out of wherever they're stored, go through them, make sure the batteries are still good, the food is still fresh, the water is still good. Bring them up to date. And if I'm wrong, great. You've got an up-to-date quake kit. But these things do happen. It's just a matter of time here. All righty, let's see. We're going to take a phone call. The Analog Anarchist from Maine. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I'm having all kinds of trouble with the Internet. I'm not really a computer person, but I am a technician. My ISP, Internet Service Provider, is the phone company. It's Fairpoint, which bought out the landlines in New England from Verizon, which bought them from 9X, which was whatever, it was the Bell operating company. They have a rather clunky email system, but you pay for it. Starting at Monday morning at midnight, Explorer 7 and Explorer 8 are blocked from getting the sign-in page. It comes up a DNS error.
It's not just where you are. I've heard this from all across the country. And
they're denying it. I spent hours on the phone with tech support. Finally, the kid says to me, "You need to buy a new system." And I said, "You need to buy a new customer."
Yeah, it is a problem, and it is weird why anybody would design a web page that won't work with the older versions of Internet Explorer. We know that Microsoft is just trying to force everybody onto Windows 10, but you can still get Windows 7 and Windows 8 machines. What operating system are you on?
XP.
Okay.
It's the same website. They're blocking you from the sign-in page. When you get on there with Google Chrome or with what's the other one? An alternate browser, it goes in. It doesn't give me the features that I need that I get with Explorer. But your DNS error, they gave me two. If anybody knows any other codes to put in for alternate DNS server, I'd like to know them because I really need to get in with my XP computers that have the files on them so I can go directly to email instead of moving files from one machine to another just to satisfy them.
Okay, well, what version of Internet Explorer are you on right now, if I may ask?
I've got 3 with with Explorer 8 and 1 with 7. And I got to tell you something weird. 7 sometimes works better than 8.
Well, that's definitely true. I've worked on a Windows 8 machine. I much prefer Windows 7. I would have loved to have stayed with my XP machine. And I'm just trying to figure out what is the latest version of Internet Explorer that'll work on XP, and I can't see the version that I have.
It is 8.
It is 8.
The man that worked on it for me said, "You can't go any higher than 8." So I said, okay.
Okay. Well, I do know that Internet Explorer has a lot of added things in there that are interfaced to because Skype, for example, its default page when you bring that up uses Internet Explorer. And you can actually have Skype's summary page stop working if you don't have the right version of Internet Explorer. And Microsoft, of course, is trying to play this game of forcing everybody onto their system to create a monopoly, and it's just angering a lot of people such as yourself. And it's angering me as well. Ultimately, though, somebody had to make a deal somewhere because it's ridiculous to write websites that aren't going to work with all of the currently used browsers. HTML5 was supposed to be the new standard that was going to be universal and get rid of a lot of these incompatibility issues. And Microsoft is already out there doing the same thing they did with HTML, saying, well, we're going to change it for our system, so when you're on our system, you won't go anywhere else. Computer makers actually used to do that back in the early days of computers. Every computer company and every computer had its own operating system. And the idea was once you invested in a particular platform and operating system, you would stay there because you'd invested all this time building your applications for that machine, and it was going to be really expensive to change computer brands. Then the Bell Labs came up with Unix, which horrified the computer industry, and they lobbied Bell to not release it. But UC Berkeley had already come up with a copy of the source tape, so they released their version of Unix, the Berkeley Standard Distribution. Everybody grabbed it. It was wonderful. Didn't matter what computer you were on. The operating system was the same. The programming was the same. Software was portable. And then AT&T turned around and released their version of Unix called System 5 and said, "See, aren't we great?" All right, listen, thank you for the phone call. We got to let you go, and sorry about your computer problems, but I've heard that from other people. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Now, Fox News just ran a story about these 68 members of Congress who are staging a sit-in on the floor of the House of Representatives. They're literally sitting there. It's past the 24-hour mark, demanding that there be action on gun control, that the guns be taken away. We're protesting. And Stacey Dash basically came on out and said it's so uncivilized, and it is. This isn't the way Congress is supposed to work. Tantrums to get their point of view. And what's really ironic is that most of these 68 feel that Americans should not be allowed to boycott Israel in protest over their treatments of the Palestinian. But by golly, we're going to have a sit-in to grab the guns. We absolutely have to have the guns. You know, when the criminals show up, just accept your robbery and rape and death with dignity. Now, down in Flint, Michigan, the Environmental Protection Agency, which is more about grabbing land for collateral than it is about the environment, has declared the Flint water safe for all residents as long as they're using filters. They're saying filtered water is now safe enough for all residents, including pregnant women and children. I have 3 comments. Test your water anyway. This is the government telling you it's safe. And this is the same government agency who said the air was safe to breathe in the 9/11 aftermath, condemning all of those first responders to horrible, lingering respiratory illnesses and death. And I want to know who's expected to pay for the filters. It's just another way to soak money out of the people. Now, Vladimir Putin is rapidly becoming an icon around the world for people who are concerned about their health and safety. Russia is currently GMO-free. Putin is positioning Russia to be the world's largest supplier of natural GMO-free food, which is why he's on Monsanto's special high-interest targets list, which automatically puts Putin on the U.S. government's special high-interest targets list. Well, now he's going on the war path about vaccines because he's been reading all these stories about vaccines that don't actually immunize, vaccines that seem to cause more disease, and just the outright harm vaccines cause outside the illness, like peanut anaphylaxis. And he's absolutely right. We live in a country where corporations can sell you anything, no matter how harmful and dangerous or ineffective it is, as long as it's getting money out of your pocket into their pocket and into the government's pocket. That's what I meant the other day when I said this lust for ink and paper to keep the central bankers happy has destroyed all that was best in the American character. Now, I have a couple of stories about SSRIs. We have been talking for a very long time about how they can lead to uncontrollable acts of violence and suicide. We've talked about SSRIstories.org. We've talked about how all these mass shootings being wagged at us by the gun grabbers involve people who were on these medications or withdrawing from them. And now we're finding out the Orlando shooter was apparently on them, had gone through serious personality changes shortly before the shooting, was apparently concerned enough where he was researching this stuff online. But as it turns out, SSRIs have other side effects that you need to be aware of. And I found this article over at druginjury.com. Use of some popular SSRI antidepressants increase the risk of developing cataracts. We're talking about your eyesight here now. And it's currently estimated SSRIs are causing 22,000 extra cases of cataracts every year. Now, there's another article that we posted to the front page of WhatReallyHappened.com. And this was from a website, I'm going to have to spell it, rxisk.org, which is RX risk. It's a combination of the pharmacy symbol and risk. And the article is Keeping an Eye on the Ball, Visual Problems on SSRIs. And it's a first-person story about somebody whose vision started to deteriorate on SSRIs. More about this when we come back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about SSRIs. And remember, just a week or so ago, they finally came out and admitted SSRIs are not actually helping depression. And they've got these negative side effects of violence and suicide. And as it turns out, a little more research, they're causing all kinds of problems, including problems with eyes. So there's this article, Keeping an Eye on the Ball, Vision Problems on SSRIs, and it's a first-person story about somebody who was put on SSRIs by their doctor, and all of a sudden, they start developing vision problems. And they go back to the doctor, and they do the usual ophthalmological tests, and they don't find anything. But it's all kinds of distorted vision, can't recognize letters, and all the rest of that, and finally realized it was the SSRIs. Finally got a doctor who did an electroretinogram. Now, this is like an EEG, but it's on the retina of the eye instead of the brain, and found incredible amounts of electric activity going on that's not supposed to be there. Now, most people don't really understand how your eyes work. The eye is not a camera. A lot of the processing that allows you to recognize shapes and edges is done right in the retina. And what is sent over the optic nerve to the brain is an already tokenized impression of what the eye is seeing. And if the retina isn't working correctly, the brain is getting junk data back there at the occipital lobe. And I brought this up because one of the readers of WhatReallyHappened.com went through the same thing. This guy was on 19 different medications, most for anxiety and a couple of other issues I don't need to go into. And last April, his vision just went totally useless, lost all peripheral vision. What was left was distorted. Everything appeared to be gigantic in size, couldn't recognize things like windows and doors. And the doctors were saying, it's probably a stroke. Here's another prescription. Here's another prescription. And he did his research, and he found this same article, and he's weaned himself off of most of his medication. And his vision is starting to return. That's the good news about this particular situation. If you get off the SSRIs, this particular vision problem will reverse itself over time. And what's really amazing is about this guy's describing his experience with his doctors and his hospital, where they really weren't interested. They just wanted to write another prescription. And apparently one of his doctors was treating him for a condition that could be made worse by a medication given to him by another doctor. And the two doctors were not allowed to talk to each other about sorting this out without a HIPAA clearance. So our reader and his doctor signed the HIPAA clearance, and the hospital still would not allow them to talk to each other, even though they worked in the same hospital on the same patient. This is a very bad way to run medicine, unless, of course, protecting profits and guarding against lawsuits is your highest priority. Now, looking at the mailbox, two things leap out. Somebody sent in a comment about the Democrats' gun protests. What a pity it wasn't they weren't so passionate about stopping that Iraq war. And I've had two people write in about the DNS computer issues. That caller was talking about working with his ISP, and it's blocking older versions of Internet Explorer, which is not common to that. I don't think it had anything to do with the DNS itself, but Google provides public DNS with the following two IP addresses, 4.4.4.4 and 8.8.8.8. And very often, if you're using your local company as a DNS service provider, they will, in fact, filter your DNS requests. I don't know that we can say that Google isn't filtering, given their allegiance to Hillary Clinton and so forth, but it's an alternative. I don't think that's his particular problem there. Now then, getting on back to health and safety. It turns out, after all this time and all these scares about salmonella, that the U.S. Department of Agriculture's process for monitoring salmonella contamination in chicken, which is the most consumed meat in the United States of America, may be flawed and isn't in fact catching all instances of salmonella, which is why you hear about all these recalls of products that went out there with the USDA seal of approval. We are living in an environment, a society, a government that is becoming hostile to health and safety and human life, because we are of no more worth to them than what money we can give them or what workers and soldiers we can breed for them. And these are all artifacts of living under fascism, which Benito Mussolini himself defined as the alignment of corporate interest and government power against the general population. And we're there. We're there. When you look at all these dangerous, ineffective products being sold to us, in some cases now forced on us by government edict, mandatory vaccines, and they're only just now admitting that mixing 5 and 6 vaccines together all at once in one injection is actually dangerous. Nobody ever apparently tested for that before. You know, this isn't bartending where you can mix, gin and vermouth and all the rest of that in a piece of lemon and have something pleasant. We're talking about these very complex medications. And when you put them all together in a single syringe, you don't know how they're interacting or how the body is going to interact when all of these chemicals come in at the same time. Nobody was checking for that. Vaccines are a $27 billion, with a B, dollar business every year in this country. And that's the agenda, $27 billion a year. If you get sick or if your kid dies, we'll just claim you killed him with shaken baby syndrome, because we have to protect the profits. Now, over in Iceland, there's a volcano, Hekla. It's nicknamed the Gateway to Heck. It's in South Iceland. It has not erupted for 16 years. But apparently there are readings indicating it may be ready to have a major eruption. And when those Icelandic volcanoes go, it is a major headache for everybody. So if you're in Iceland, get your volcano kit ready. Up at the University of Alaska, they're getting ready to undertake a study of the controlled demolition of World Trade Center Building Number 7. And find out if the way it collapsed is only explainable through a controlled demolition. Well, we already know the answer. The only way that Building 7 could come down into its own footprint the way it did is that all of the load-bearing members had to fail at the exact same split second. Every professional demolition expert who's looked at that video is saying there is no question that's a professional demolition. And the University of Alaska has announced they're going to undertake a study of it. And I fully expect that they're going to get a phone call saying that their federal funds are going to be cut off immediately if they continue down this very dangerous and subversive path of inquiry, as it were. Now, as you know, earlier in the week, the current president of TEPCO came on out and admitted that the then management of TEPCO was lying to the world about the severity of the meltdown at the Fukushima Daiichi power station. And admitted, yeah, you could say it was a cover-up. Yeah, it was. And a lot of people have noticed this, and we're seeing a lot of articles like this one over in Activist Post saying, once again, the corporate media and government were caught lying, And the conspiracy theorists were proven right yet again. Now, we're not saying that to gloat. We're simply pointing something out. There's a reason why the independent media is now the high ground in the war for the minds of America and the world. Polls are showing trust in government, and the established corporate media is at an all-time low. They're losing control over your mind. And they don't like it one little tiny bit. And they don't know what to do about it, because everything we're doing here is protected free speech under the First Amendment. But we are consistently proving to be more accurate. Of course, we're cheating. We have the truth on our side. But all we're doing is we're putting out the facts and encouraging people, analyze this for yourself. And then decide if the official story makes any sense. And again, with regard to Fukushima, when they had that picture of the top blowing off one of the reactors, and TEPCO was saying it was a hydrogen gas explosion, and the corporate media was saying it was a hydrogen gas explosion, and we pointed out, hydrogen gas explosions produce water vapor which is white. That cloud was a sickly brown and matched the color of quadrivalent plutonium oxide. And when we came out with that, we got the usual paid internet shills, wacko, tinfoil hat wearing, conspiracy, loon, wing nut, blah, 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 blah. And once again, we've been proven right. Now, I'm not saying the independent media is perfect. We get a lot of disinformation fed to us. We get a lot of stuff fed to us in the hope to embarrass and discredit us, to level the playing field, to find some way to lure all of the public back to the warm, gentle embrace of ABC, CNN, BBC, CBS, Fox. So far, it's not working. Have you noticed on the corporate media how the talking heads are now all hot babes in very skimpy clothing? They're turning themselves into the TV equivalent of a supermarket tabloid, trying to lure you back. But remember, Thomas Jefferson said, it's the highest duty of every American citizen to keep themselves fully informed so that they can make good choices. And that's what you're doing. You're keeping yourself fully informed. You are not fully informed watching TV or reading newspapers and magazines. That's the big lie. They want you to believe you know everything that's going on. But you don't. Nobody gives you the truth for free. You have to go out and hunt it down. We're going to help. We're going to give you some leads. But always our encouragement is follow the information and decide for yourself what is going on. Now, the individual who called in about SSRIs and contacted me about SSRIs and eyesight problems put me on to yet another website that I actually had not known was out there, called greenmedinfo.com. And I went on over there, and there's a lot of great stories, and I'm going to be using them as a resource from now on. One that I picked out for posting was the Gulf War Syndrome Plot, Part 2, U.S. Government's Conspiracy of Silence and Obstruction Against Gulf War Veterans. And they're basically talking about all these Gulf War veterans who were made permanently ill by exposure to chemical weapons and experimental medications, because when you're in the military, you are assumed to be a guinea pig for whatever they want to test on you. And some of that stuff has consequences. And the military doesn't want to actually have to pay for the damage they cause, so it's always this idea, it's all in your head. You're just making it up, you're playing for sympathy, you're looking for a medical out from the forces, and it's all just in your head. And yet these people are really showing serious syndromes that last long after they're out of the military. And they're being ignored by the VA. And if you're a parent of a military-aged child, you ought to be sharing this information with them. The recruiters will make any promises they need to get the kid to sign that contract. They are not liable for not keeping those promises. The courts have already said promises made by military recruiters are not legally enforceable. They can say whatever they want. If you sign this, we'll make you an astronaut. You'll be the first man on Mars. And once you are done with the killing and the bombing and the invading and the conquering, and you are of no more use to the money junkies, they're going to just abandon you. Look at what's been going on over at the VA. It is a disgrace. It's a slap in the face of all those people who took the oath, put on the uniform, and did what they were told to do. And they're just being abandoned. And I've said before, whether you agree with the wars or not, and I don't, as a nation, we do owe a debt of honor to those military people who have suffered permanent injury because of their service to the U.S. government. And the U.S. government is simply abandoning them. Story coming out of ActivistPost.com, how risky are the World Economic Forum's top 10 emerging technologies for 2016. And basically what it is, they've gone down and said, these are the hot technologies on which the fortunes of tomorrow will be based. And the technologies are nanosensors and the Internet of Nano Things, trying to network it all together. Next generation batteries, actually I'm on board with that one. The blockchain, 2D materials, autonomous vehicles, organs on chips, perovskite solar cells, apparently there's an energy breakthrough there, open AI ecosystems, optogenetics, and systems metabolic engineering. I'm not even sure what that last one is supposed to mean. Are they going to exercise proper care and restraint in the deployment of these technologies? Probably no more than they do with GMO, I would say. So, now up in Montreal, the Catholic Church of Montreal has instituted a plan that will prohibit priests, volunteers, and everybody involved in faith education from being alone with children at any time. They're taking this step because of this growing problem with child sexual abuse by people inside the church. And the rule is going to be, if there are children, there have to be at least 2 adults. Hopefully not 2 pedophiles at the same time. But at least it's a positive step. And even more important, it's an acknowledgement that there is a problem. Something the Catholic Church has been very loath to admit, that there's even a problem to begin with. Remember when they kept saying that, the devil is putting these luscious children in front of our priests as a temptation. It's all their fault. No, it isn't. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the last segment of our program today here. And the public reaction to these 68 members of Congress holding a sit-in on the floor of the House of Representatives is decidedly negative. It's being held up of just how badly government wants to disarm the law-abiding citizens. And the backlash has reached the point where Paul Ryan has shut off the official camera feeds from inside the House of Representatives. So C-SPAN is now resorting to rebroadcasting Periscope and Facebook feeds about what's going on over there. But this is not going to make them look very well. And it's going to send the message that gun owners are right. The government, the same government that's spending your tax money to give military weapons to Mexican drug criminals and terrorist groups, wants to disarm the law-abiding American citizen. And for that reason and so many others, the U.S. Congress has an approval rating of 16%, the lowest of any government branch, although the competition is fierce. The disapproval rating of Congress is 80%, so it appears there's 4% in there who aren't really sure about what's going on. Now, over at YouTube, they're getting ready to establish a new policy where making negative comments about someone will get your channel shut down. Now, I don't know how they're going to deal with people who are viewing your videos and making negative comments, because when I put up videos, I get a lot of comments. Wingnut, tinfoil hat, conspiracy, wacko, And I assume YouTube's policy is not going to apply to the hired online propagandists who are the authors of much of this nonsense here. Andrew Napolitano is out there saying that the no-fly, no-buy means no freedom. And again, if the no-fly list, if the terror watch list was really filled with terrorists, I wouldn't have a problem with this. But even the U.S. government admits most of the people on these lists shouldn't be there. But there's no official formal way to take them off. You can get put on the no-fly list if you have an argument with a stewardess. If she dumps a cup of hot coffee in your lap and you stand up and yell at her, you're going to be on the no-fly list, and then you're not going to be allowed to buy a gun. What's really alarming is this push to suspend Second Amendment rights for anybody that's declared mentally ill in a country where the psychiatric industry has declared every normal human behavior a mental illness, including the desire to eat natural, healthy food. It's a mental illness, orthorexia nervosa. I prescribe 20 Big Macs right now to save you from yourself. It is absurd. Now, the Federal Reserve, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, Janet Yellen, is actually out there starting to flirt with the idea of the Fed providing debt-free money for government infrastructure projects like they used to have in the Bank of Canada's charter. Well, it's still in there, but they don't use it. And maybe the Federal Reserve is realizing that it needs to sort of start migrating back to the banking system the nation was started with. It won't last, but at least they understand there's a problem. There's the music. Time for me to get on out of here. I'll be back tomorrow with the lovely Lady Claire here on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Until then, stay tuned for John Stadmiller's show. He's got a lot of stuff to share with you. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.